Buddy. Good? Yeah. Did you guys hear we just ran a polygraph challenge? Anybody come to see that? Anybody? A few of you? Good, okay. So we hired a federal polygraph examiner to fly in, and then people signed up to see if they can beat the lie detector. And we had a bunch of good crowds. We only had 3 people beat the lie detector. Let's see. Is this thing working? That's Dave, hooked up to it. Interestingly enough, the last question was, do you like DerbyCon better than DEF-CON? And that's the screen of Dave lying, because he said yes, but it said no. I don't know. Where's Dave? Dave's not here. I wanted him to talk about how he can love DEF-CON better. No, what he did is the polygraph has a butt clench pad, because people say that you can cheat it by clenching your butt. So the new polygraphs have a butt clench pad. You put a pad under here, and then when they feel if you're clenching. And Dave's butt clench monitor went through the roof. He did it on purpose because he knew, because everyone was watching, so it was kind of funny to see his butt clench pad go through the roof. Yeah, anyhow, so it was a really cool experience. That's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about social engineering, of course. That's my topic of interest. And we're going to talk about something specific based on some research that has come out over the last year and a half, 2 years, and then some things that were in my book that came out a few months ago, talking about the amygdala. First, if anyone hasn't ever heard me define social engineering, I have a really broad definition for social engineering, and that's any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interest. Now, I do it broad because I don't think SE is always negative. Right? I think we use it all the time, every day. We use it, our kids use it against us, we use it with our spouse, we use it with our boss, our people who work for us, our shrink, our clergy. Everybody uses social engineering. At the same time, the principles that you see, hey Dave, hey buddy. That's Dave lying about how much he loves Derby. Now you're going to stay. Now I'm nervous. No, I explained that it was the butt clench. I did. So anyway, what I was saying was that the same principles that are used in the positive methods for social engineering are used by the bad guys. And when we analyze them, we can clearly see how they're used. Oh, crap. Is there an exit? Okay, so listen. When Dave and I started working together 10 years ago, he told me that he was going to prank me at a speech. And then the first year I came to Derby, I was given a speech, and he had put an ad in the paper for someone that had a monkey that throws poop. And someone sent me the ad that he was trying to rent someone with a poop-throwing monkey. So I was so scared that there was going to be a poop-throwing monkey when I got on the stage that I was really nervous. My palms were sweating. I was nervous, and I was checking the room out, and I'm looking everywhere, and I'm like, Dave, so what's the prank? And I come up on stage, and he comes up, and he gives me a big hug. Dave's hugs, which are really long and not comfortable for anyone but Dave. And then I'm like, okay, man, so what's going to happen? And he's like, nothing. I just spent 3 months making you think everything bad was going to happen. And that was the worst prank of all because I actually expected bad things, and I was so nervous about it. So I'm going to go with that nothing's going to happen. Let's just go with that, right? Okay. And it's your guy's job, if he comes in with some kind of monkey throwing poop, to block him and take the poop for me, okay? Okay, it's your job. You guys are my poop shield. Yeah. Okay, so anyhow, when you start to look at how people get social engineered, so we're going to focus on the negative parts, right? Not the positive. Because that's what we're here for, a security conference. We're talking about how all the things that are happening in the world are happening, all these breaches, all these attacks, how things are people are becoming more and more bold when it comes to on-site and impersonation attacks. So we need to analyze those attacks and figure out how is it that people are so easily fooled. Even though we read these stories, we hear them constantly. So there is some science behind this, and that's what we're going to talk about. But for me, to really define it, I'm not smart. I'm really not very bright. So I need things to be really simple. So I looked up, how can I simplify what a... Sorry, I'm really nervous now. I'm like, jump, I heard the door move. Oh. If there was a butt clench pad here, you would have seen that thing spike through the roof. There would have been some serious clenching. How am I going to give a speech now, Dave? You know I love you, right? You know it. Oh, crap. No, come on. Wait, look. No, I have.
Unfortunately, I got to be. So you have one, I have to give you one of mine. But good news is that means you have two, so I can give you two of mine.
I can't drink that. I'll be in the hospital.
I don't have enough for three, though, so you need two. Drink up, buddy.
Where's the poop-throwing monkey? I'd rather have that. I want the poop-throwing monkey. I can't do this now. You guys won't get anything out of this speech. I'll basically be like, blah, 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 blah. So, because of things like this, I have to make things very simple. So, for me, not for you. You guys probably all get this, but for me, I had to see how I can define what a buffer overflow is. So, this was as simple as I can make it for anyone who doesn't know, including me. Okay? Hey. Okay? So, that's a buffer overflow, okay? Now, there's a lot more complexity in that, and if you go talk to someone like Corlan or Maddie or Matteo, you'll get a real explanation of what a buffer overflow is, and many of you probably, but for me, this helps me define it. So I had to also do a little research into what buffers are and what overflows are, right? So we understand the concept. A buffer is a place in a program that was meant to hold a certain amount of code in memory, and it has a certain set of memory. Now, if bad programming occurs, then when code comes into it, it may overflow into another area of the program. And when it overflows, if it's just crappy code and bad programming, it crashes. But if it's malicious code, it can actually execute part of that code. And that makes sense to all of us, right? So it's very, very simplifying here of that. So I started to think, can you do this to a human? Is there certain code that you can pour into a human that will then overflow into a different area of their brain, and then you can run some kind of malicious code to make them do something that they shouldn't be doing, which is, again, the definition of social engineering. So I started to look at different types of information or brain overload. And the first was information overload. This is easily defined. We all get this, right? You ever been at work or at home and you have your laptop out, the TV's on, you got your iPad or tablet next to you, and maybe there's some music going, and there's all these different sensory things coming into you, and it's information overload. It's so much. They now have studies done that talk about people who sleep with their laptop next to their bed, or their phone next to their bed, or their tablet next to their bed, and that light actually continually transmits, not information, but signals into the brain. The light makes you not sleep well. The LEDs from monitors and devices make us sleep bad. So this is information overload. The results are frustration, tiredness, stress, anxiety, and is it conducive to social engineering? Tell me, what do you think? Okay, so if someone's frustrated, tired, stressed, and anxious, we may be able to cause, from that information overload, some type of code to run that shouldn't be running normally. It happens to us all the time. How many times when you're stressed, you make really bad decisions? We do it, right? Okay, but when looking at that, for me now, as a professional social engineer, not malicious, I'm not malicious, right? Regardless of what Dave says about me. I don't like to do this type of social engineering because it leaves people feeling bad for having met me. So it's not a very positive effect once you're done with the gig. Then they feel bad. So I say this works, but let's go on to a different type. How about chemical overload? Many of you have that this weekend. Chemical overload. Okay, and I've experienced it myself, and it looks like I'm going to experience more of it shortly. So this is the effect of maybe overeating, because when we eat, chemicals are released in our brain, or over drinking, or drugs, or other types of things we put in our body. And it can slow down our processing power. For momentarily, it can cause euphoria, it can cause other good emotions, but it can also cause many bad emotions. It can heighten our stress, our anxiety, if we're doing things like cocaine or other harsh drugs, or the after effects of drinking too much alcohol. How many of us love the feeling we get the next morning? We don't really enjoy that, right? So these kinds of stress and anxiety, can they be good for a social engineer? Can it cause you to get someone to do something they shouldn't do? Sure can, right? Sure can. Again, not a real type that I like to use. I don't really go into like my targets and say, hey, chug this, and then give me your passwords. Doesn't really work too well, right? So, and this really wouldn't work well at all. So I don't really like to use those types of overloads when it comes to social engineering. But how about this one, an emotional overload? This is the effect on the brain when it must process emotions based on verbal or non-verbal stimuli. And the results are the emotional processing centers of our brain have to take that emotion in. Now we have 5 senses, right? And all of them trigger emotional responses. They can, right? How many of you are like kinesthetics? You like to feel things. Anyone here a kinesthetic? You like to feel things? So when you go shopping in a store and you're buying clothes, do you have to feel every article of clothing? My wife's just like this. She has to touch everything. Touching everything in the store before she can buy it. She's actually returned clothes she bought online because they didn't feel right. Not because they didn't fit right, they didn't feel right, okay? So this is a very big sense. Most of us are visuals. We can have a lot of emotional stimuli that's triggered by what we see. I had an interview with Neil Fallon. Anyone know the band Clutch? Clutch, yeah, oh, they're rock, don't they? They're awesome. Well, Neil said that when he gets in the show mood, what he does is he has a shirt that, this is going to sound really vile, he doesn't wash, and he smells it, and it puts him in show mood. I don't know what show mood is. I don't know if I want to ever know what show mood is, but I'm assuming it's preparing his brain for being on stage, because he's not really like an extrovert. So that is a very big sense for him, and maybe you've experienced that where you smelled something and it brought you back to childhood, or it brought you back to a good memory, or a part of your life that was really pleasant. Very big emotional sense stimuli there. Taste is another one. We can taste things. I tell this story. It's really, really disgusting. So I'm going to tell it to you because it just makes sense that I should do that, right? So when I was little, I used to love making eggs. You know, you cut a hole in the bread, you make an egg, and it's all nice and yolky and delicious, all beautiful. Well, my parents bought chickens and had chickens. So I go out one day and I grab a couple eggs, and I start heating up the bread in the pan and the butter, and I crack the egg, and what comes out is a half-formed bloody chick. Oh, it's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen in my life. Thing writhing in a pan, frying. It was like, oh, jeez. It was so terrible. It was so... I didn't... How was it? Come up here. No. There you are. That's yours. You're not welcome. I heaved for minutes. It was so bad that actually the thought of tasting an egg for over 12 years, the thought of tasting an egg after 12 years would make me want to vomit. That's how strong that emotional stimuli can be, right? So these are just some silly and maybe not so silly examples of how strong external stimuli could affect our emotions. So this is a really powerful point to understanding the way we process thought when it comes to emotion, especially when we're trying to talk about social engineering people. So we have to understand a few things first. Emotions versus feelings versus logic. Before I show you the definitions, does anyone want to guess on the definition of emotion? I would never have gotten it if I didn't work with Dr. Ekman. So this is not an intelligence test. I'm just wondering if anyone knows the definition of emotion. or wants to take a risk of guessing? Anyone? That's weird. No? Okay, no takers? So here's the definition of emotion. A set of psychological rules made up based on our previous experience in biology to deal with the circumstance at hand. Okay, so basically an emotion is a rule, a code, a set of code in our body that tells our body how to deal with a certain situation. Like, a great example of that is when you're a kid, you look to your parents and you look at their face to learn what's good and bad, right? And how many of you have kids in here? How many of you could have done this? Hold your hand up if you could have done this with your kid, where you just look at them and give them and they know that that's not what you should be doing, right? Because all of us can do that. And that's why, because our kids look to us for these responses to say, here's what's bad, here's what's good in life, and here's how we should react. And we grow up that way. We grow up that way. So, and these things create a set of code in us, code that runs, that tells us our good from bad, our right from wrong, our moral structure, and that really has a lot of dependencies on how we're raised, our culture, all those different types of things, which unfortunately we don't have time to get in here. But it's important to understand the difference between an emotion and a feeling, because an emotion is this set of rules, this code that is based on external stimuli in biology and our upbringing that runs inside of us when that external stimuli affects us. Okay, and there's been 7 emotions defined. So we have happiness, sadness, fear. Happiness, sadness, fear, contempt, disgust, and anger. And those are the 7 base emotions. Now from that we have feelings. Now Webster's defines a feeling as an emotional state or the capacity to respond emotionally. So what does that mean? Well, that means once we have an emotion triggers in us, now the feeling is the resultant of that emotion. So we feel happy. You see a beautiful woman, okay? And you feel happy. The emotion of happiness is triggered. The resultant could be many things, physically or physiologically, right? So those things are feelings that we have, not emotions. Holy crap! You guys all suck. You all suck.
Pete, that was awesome.
You scared the crap out of me. That was an emotional trigger to external stimuli of extreme fear. Okay?
Thank you, audience. I appreciate it.
You all suck. Really? Nothing from any of you? Not one of you on this side?
Sorry.
My ex-students, nothing. Come on now. What you guys are getting from now on is this, because I'm facing this way. So a feeling is this is ridiculous. Now I gotta look over my shoulder. How am I gonna focus and do? Oh boy, you guys are terrible. Okay, so the emotion was fear. The resultant feeling was something very hot running down my leg. So no, but it's actually a good example. So the emotion was fear. The feeling afterward was laughter and happiness because I realized that I wasn't in danger, right? So fear causes a fight or flight response, and I didn't see no one triggered. You guys really were good. I didn't see anything. I felt the stage move, and I felt it, and I went to turn around, and he was right there, and then you heard me scream like a little girl. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, maybe you should all suffer trying to hear me because of that. Yeah, you guys didn't tip me off. I'm an afflicted man right now. It's terrible. Okay, and then logic, which none of this has any relevance on logic right now. There's no logic in this whole room. Understanding based on facts, defined axioms, and rules of inference. So what does this mean? So we have, now people are looking, and now I'm like, stop. up. So, so we have a defined set of rules that tell us what is logical, what is reasonable, right? And let's apply this to the work environment. We have a set of policies, we call them, that is corporate logic for your company. And maybe those corporate logic policies state like no USB keys at all that are not owned or given to you by your employer. That would be, let's say, a policy. And the logic of that is, that means you can't find a USB in the parking lot, and just because it's labeled porn doesn't mean you can put it in the computer, right? So logic says the policy states no USBs, doesn't matter what they're labeled. I can't put them in. Okay, so but this is important to understand the difference as we go on and talk about what these things mean for us. Now, let's talk about what the amygdala is. And this is, I know this is a heavy topic. I am not a psychologist or a neuroscientist. I'm just fascinated by this stuff. So for me, this was really important to understand. And we don't need to remember all these little facts. But let's see if I have a, yeah, I do, don't I? Right? Yeah, no? Not working? Yeah, there, okay. So this little it's a green ball here, but in our brains, it's actually a little like walnut-sized shape of gray matter that sits in our brain, and that's the amygdala. And the amygdala, this little tiny ball of gray matter, processes every piece of external stimuli that comes in through our brain. So everything, all those modalities we talked about, all the senses that you have, all those things that occur outside are coming in through your sensory organs and into your brain, and they're hitting your amygdala first. And this is really important for us to understand with some of these other facts. So as it processes this external stimuli, it figures out what to do. Okay, like let's use this wonderful experience that just happened to me here. So my brain started processing fear, and what happened as the stimuli? Well, my heart rate went up, I screamed like a little girl, I got into a defensive posture, and then I tried to protect vital organs because I didn't know what Dave was going to do to me. All of that was like an automated response, right? An automated response to fear. And then afterwards, nervous laughter because I realized I wasn't having a poop-throwing monkey or a taser or something like that inserted into me. So that was like, ha, 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 please stop touching me. Okay? So that's the resultant of all of those emotions coming in to my amygdala. And it sends out these results to different parts of our body, not just our brain. So our brain gets the results, but then it triggers different things. Like, oh, your heart rate better go up, you better start breathing heavier, all these different things that you may need to fight or flight, okay? So it also changes based on the circumstance, right? If we saw, I mean, this is even better because we had Dave here. You see that, you see someone running at you, what do? You get defensive, right? If you were standing there talking to your girlfriend and she did that, would you be like, ha, ha, ha? No. You'd get defensive. You'd stand up. You'd stand in a defensive posture. Why? Because you're about to be hit, and your brain would process these things. And if any of you have training, martial arts, boxing, or other things like that, then you tend to even automate these things. After years and years of being trained, you can get in defensive posture without even thinking about it. Whereas in the bottom picture, if you saw a woman doing that to you, not raising her fist at you, your automated response would be much different for most of us, okay? And depending on how many of these you drink. But your response would be completely different. Your amygdala would send out different resulting emotions and feelings and processes to your body. As it processes, though, and this is the part where we get to the really interesting stuff, it has to take power. And the only way I can understand this, and it's a really silly example because it kind of minimizes what our brain is doing in a bad way, but it has to take power, kind of like processing power from other parts of our brain because it handles so much. I mean, think about this. Your eyes are amazing devices. And you're looking around, like I'm looking around a room, and I'm seeing hundreds of faces, and I'm able to process what people are looking at, if someone's falling asleep or if they're paying attention. In addition, I'm hearing laughter at the same time or other things. I'm also trying to listen behind me in case the door opens again. I'm now more observant of the stage if it's going to move, if Dave's going to run in. At the same time, I'm feeling things. I'm able to feel the button on this. All of this is happening at the same exact time. So I don't have to stop talking to go, oh, I need to listen now. And your brain is taking all of this stuff in and figuring out what to do with it without you having to plan out that process. the visual cortices, so our eyes, and then the parts of our brain that control what we see, are activated around 300 milliseconds. Now, I know we're talking in milliseconds, so this is like hard for me to comprehend, but let's try to grasp that. So the parts of our brain that will process what our eyes are taking in at 300 milliseconds. But our amygdala will process visual stimuli at 50 milliseconds. Now, we might as well be talking about minutes here to really help us understand that. That means there's 250 milliseconds of time in between your amygdala is processing the emotional stimuli and your brain catches up. Now, we don't see it because it's milliseconds and it's so fast that we don't get it. But that means, well, let's give an example. Have you ever been at a party and maybe you met somebody and after you leave, you're like, man, that guy or gal, I really didn't like them. You ever been there? Anyone have that problem? Okay. A couple of us are admitting it, the rest of you are lying. So when you have that, what is that? And maybe you had no interaction, right? You didn't have a conversation with them. It was just some person off in the corner and you felt a little weird about it. Well, that's your brain processing nonverbal stimuli. So however he acted, was he creepy? Was he checking you out too much? Was he smelling your hair? You know, whatever it was he, he's doing like weird things and you don't realize what's happening. And these things now affect your viewpoint of him. And you may not be able to put your finger on it, but that's what's happening. Your amygdala is processing these emotional stimuli way before your brain is catching up and able to say, here's what's going on. This is really important for us to understand when we get to the next part. And it can process auditory signals as quick as 15 milliseconds. As quick as 15 milliseconds. No, I ice you back. I ice you back. No. I have 3 bands and 2 ice, so you are all going away now and I'm going to cry. I'm giving a speech, okay, so. Okay. This is not the way to win friends, okay? To chuck this at a crowd of people who want to learn about social engineering. This is for not telling me about Dave. No. My own son is sitting in the audience and didn't help me, okay? What does that tell you? Okay, so our amygdala can process auditory signals as quick as 15 milliseconds. Remember, we're talking about other cortices blow up 300 milliseconds. This is super fast. There's a ton of time in between. How are you getting all from here to? I thought you only had one hologram. It was out in the audience. What are you? Do you have a twin or something? What is going on? This is worse than the poop throwing monkey. I just want to tell you. Okay. Okay. Now, certain emotions can shut down the brain's ability to process logic for very short periods of time. You want proof? Okay. Think about this. How many of you, be honest, how many of you have been sitting at your desk or your phone or whatever device you use for email, and you're really tired? You got 200 emails you got to check, you got a report that's due, your boss just called you, you got a flat tire on the way to work this morning, you had an argument with your wife, you killed a squirrel on the way to work and you love squirrels, whatever. There's some bad things happening in your life and you're really stressed. And now you get an email from a person who you generally joke around with a lot. And they say something really sarcastic, like, maybe if you decide to stop being lazy today, ping me and we'll do some work. And you don't even think. You just start typing this angry email. You blah, blah, all these bad words. I'm going to give you a piece of my mind. How many of you ever done that? Okay, finally, you guys are being, he's putting both hands up. Okay, most of us have had situations like that, and if not an email, where we verbally say something because we get hijacked, our brain, our logic processing powers go away. Now, I had this experience where I wrote about in the book, where I have a really good friend named Ben, and he always jokes with me. I mean, he's from the UK, they got real sarcastic humor. If anyone here is British, and sorry if that offends you, but too bad. He always emails me these little sarcastic quips, right? And one day, this exact situation I just told you happened. I'm really stressed out, a ton of things going on, and he emails me at like 11 a.m. saying, if you decide to get any work done today, let me know. And I just was like ready to flip out. I was going to give him a piece of my mind. And unfortunately, I started reading my email before I clicked send. And I realized how angry I sounded. And I started to picture Ben and going, why am I so mad at Ben? It's probably just Ben being Ben. And I was able to calm down. But many times what happens is we send those emails. We've all seen that commercial with the guy who clicks send and then he runs around the countryside pulling cables and throwing laptops out the window and things like that. It's based on this what happens to us, okay? We all have had this experience where our brains stop processing logic for a short period of time, and that's called amygdala hijacking. What do you think is the one emotion that can overflow the brain more than any other? Okay, how many people say fear? Raise your hands. Okay, what other emotion? Okay, anger. How many people say anger? Any others? Love is not an emotion. Believe it or not, love is a feeling. So happiness is the emotion, and the resultant feeling from happiness is love. So it is not an emotional state. It is actually a feeling. Lust is not an emotion also. That's also a feeling. It's a variance of happiness. So happiness is the code that runs, and the resultant of it, the same resultant from happiness could be lust, could be love, could be friendship, it could be a million other different things, but the beginning emotion is happiness. Any others? Grief. Now, grief is not an emotion, but sadness is the emotion linked to grief. Who said it? Said it? Someone over here? Thank you. So, how many people say sadness? Okay, what's interesting is, sorry, I'm now hearing things. So what's interesting is that all emotions will trigger this response, but the one that triggers it the most has this particular facial expression as one of its bases. Can anyone see what that is? Yeah. How many people say surprise? And how many people say sadness? And what's amazing is that this is all you need to see sadness, is the forehead. It's all you need. By the way, who wants a story on this picture? Anyone want a story? You want a story? I mean, it takes me like a little time, but I'll tell you I'll make it short. So this is my daughter, and I had this big rule in my first book. Like, I'm not going to ask who read it. It's like one person. But if anyone read it, you'll notice I didn't even say my kids' names. I just said to my kids and to my wife, and I didn't put their names anywhere. And then the second book, I was working with Dr. Ekman on the book, and I had Ben and Selena, my two good friends, who would have all the pictures in that book. All the body language pictures and facial expressions are all them. And I was going to New York City for a day to work with Dr. Ekman on the book, and my daughter started reading his book, Emotions Revealed. She was like, I want to meet him, I want to meet him. Well, I didn't know this, but she made a collage for him on his iPad of all the emotions, her making all the emotions. And she wanted to show him. So we went into New York City, and Dr. Ekman spent some time talking with her, and she showed him the collage. And he kept saying to her, oh, show me happiness, and show me this, and she would do the facial expressions. For us parents, really, really interesting point, side point. I'm on a side point, so this is a side point of a side point. Your kids cannot naturally show contempt unless you teach them. Contempt is not an emotion that you understand how to process naturally until you're taught. Whereas happiness and fear and sadness are emotions that are built in, contempt is one that is taught. So I was really happy and pleased to hear Dr. Ekman say that she stunk at contempt. So we haven't taught her that yet. But he kept coming back to sadness like 4, 5, 10 times, saying, show me sadness. So I asked him, Dr. Ekman, like, why are you asking her to do sadness so much? And we have emotions revealed out. We're talking about the emotions, and this particular part of the forehead, this particular part of the forehead right here, is that triggering. Only 5% of the people that have been tested by their organization in the history since the 70s can do that without feeling sadness or grief. And the reason that's so powerful is without any other parts of sadness, that alone can create an empathetic link between two people. So she's able to do this. So he says, you got to put her in the book. You got a user in the book. So first of all, for those of you laughing, yeah, I'm screwed, right? I'm a dead man. I might as well just pack it up and go bury myself now, because this is her not even being sad. This is her with Dr. Eckman going, here, I'll make believe I'm sad. Bam! And I'm like, dead already. So that's the side story. But the emotion is sadness. And sadness is linked to empathy. And this is why sadness is the most powerful emotion when it comes to social engineering. What is it about empathy that makes it so powerful? Who wants to take a guess? Connection with what? That's right. So, okay, it makes them want to help you. Excellent. Whoever said that, I couldn't see. Thank you. Thank you for both of your answers. So the two answers are correct. First, it creates a connection between you and the target. And second, it makes them want to help you because they feel empathy for you. And feeling empathy for you means, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep looking back. Feeling empathy for you means that you have this desire to make the other person's situation, problem, pain stop. And that's really, really powerful when it comes to social engineering. So let's recap what we know so far. The amygdala can process things as fast as 15 milliseconds, but up to let me rephrase that. It can process stimuli 100 to 280 milliseconds faster than the brain can process the same emotional stimuli. It can shut down the logic processing centers while it's triggering sadness, and all emotional stimuli runs through it. So these are three really important points when we talk about buffer overflowing the human brain. So let's define sadness non-verbally. Okay, now I already talked about this because there's varying degrees of it. And we need to understand the varying degrees of it because what we use in our SE engagements could really affect how we make the other person feel. Like, for example, this is extreme grief over here. This is extreme grief. This is someone who's feeling a little bit blue, and this is someone who's sad and crying. Now, if you walk into your engagement and you're showing extreme grief, what may be the effect on the target? I walk in with my USB key and I'm like, oh God, please put this in your computer. What? What's going to happen? Besides getting laughed at, what probably will happen? The lady's going to call 911. She's going to be like, there's a crazy guy praying to a USB key in our lobby, help. It's not going to be good. So I have to have varying levels and degrees of the sadness that's displayed, and it has to be appropriate to my pretext and to the goal with the target, right? So those things should make sense to us. When we're sad, we lower our shoulders. So I tend to stand really big, right, shoulders up, chin up, and this is not the definition of a sad when I'm in a sad state. So if I were to walk in, even displaying sadness properly on my face, but I was to do this, what do you think happens to the target? What do you think happens to them emotionally? I'm sorry? Yeah, mixed signals, right? So they may not, if they're not studying this, they may not understand what's happening. They may not be going, oh wow, that guy doesn't show sadness in his body, but only his face. But something happens remember that party when you had that guy that made you feel a little weird? That's what happens. And the red flag comes up on the inside and they go, not really sure if I can trust this guy. So we don't build trust. We don't build that empathetic link. We actually sever it. So it's important to understand that also our nonverbals need to display sadness, which means we make ourselves smaller. But what if I walk in again like this? Right? It's not going to be conducive to social engineering, is it? So that has to be the right level of displaying sadness. So you would just lower yourself, you lower your voice. When people are sad, they tend to talk a little softer like this, instead of loud and booming like I normally do. So you lower your voice, maybe you lower your shoulders, your chin stays down, not all the way down, but a little bit down, and you can display sadness the proper way. And then you can use your facial expressions to back up your pretext. What is the one aspect here? I already kind of answered this before my story, so I'll just show it to you. But to zoom in, because it's really important to understand that this here, and you can learn to do this. Okay, anyone can learn to do this. But to learn to do it, you need a picture of someone doing it properly in a mirror. Because I guarantee you, if you do it and you say, oh, I'm doing it right, you may be showing anger, because this is anger, right? This is anger on your face, and it feels like you may be doing it right. And this is like confusion. and we wouldn't want that. So you have to make sure you have a mirror with you, and you're practicing this until you get the right feeling, and then you know that this could be the right way to show that empathetic link. And you know what happens? It happens to me every time. When I do that, you see my voice got lower? It's something you can't control, because there's two rules when it comes to facial expressions. The first is a facial expression is an external representation of an emotional stimuli that is a response to electrical triggers in your brain. The reverse of that is true, which means if I make the facial expression, I can create the emotion. Now, I'm not talking about any of you, if you're here in the room, that are clinically depressed, okay, and you're on medication. I'm not talking about that, because this is not a fix for that. But if you're feeling a little blue and down, if you get like the winter blues and things like that, and you want to try something non-chemically related to fix it, go into a mirror in a bathroom and produce a real smile 10 or 15 times a day, and look at yourself while doing it. A real smile is when you activate the ocularis nerves on the side of your eyes, and you bring it up, and you have your cheeks. Now, you want to do this, not trying to hurt yourself. But you want to have a real smile, practice real smiling in the mirror, and you see yourself doing it, and it actually will tell your brain, hey, you're happy. And you can fool yourself into thinking that you're happy. You can fake it till you make it, right? You can do that. It's not you can actually fool yourself. And then, again, it's not going to go and cure clinical depression. So please, I'm not saying that. I'm not a doctor, but this is one way you can kind of fool yourself. The same way we can fool ourselves, our bodies, into feeling empathy or sadness. When I make those facial expressions, my voice always gets lower. It happens to me every time, and I can't control it, but I point it out. And when you try it, and you'll do it, you'll notice that this will happen to you. It will automatically create those connections within you to feel that emotion. Okay, so let's define some of the emotions. Who can tell me what this is? How many people say fear? How many people say surprise? Okay, interesting. We had more surprises, but it is fear. Yes, it is fear. So the fear is, there's a great difference in fear and surprise. And fear is, if you make this with your mouth and you say the word eek, 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 and you pull the lips back horizontally like they're coming back towards the end of the back towards your ears. And you go, eek. Fear has that kind of facial expression. The eyes get really wide, the lower eyelids are tense, and the upper eyelids are as far up as they can go, because what's happening with fear, right? Flight or fight. So your body needs to take in visual representation of what's happening around you. A lot of light needs to come in, plus usually a sharp gasp of air, so you know if you should run or stay. This we already talked about, but anyone not see sadness here? Right, that's very evident. How about this one? Ah, very good. I actually am really proud of the room here, because a lot of people say anger, because it's easy to confuse the two, but that is disgust. Disgust is bilateral, which means both sides of your nose come up. It's a very physiological facial expression. If you do this, if you bring both sides of your nose up and you try to breathe through your nose, it's almost impossible. It's really difficult. You got to force yourself to do it. Your body's saying, whatever object that just made you disgusted, you won't want to smell it. Usually this happens when you have vomit, or like one of you haven't bathed and you're going to come try to give me a hug. You're going to see this on me. Oh, God. And I'm going to hand you some deodorant or one of these. So that is disgust. Here? Yeah, that's an easy one, isn't it? We learned this one from childhood on, and it's real happiness. And the amazing thing is, in studies, they've proven that we can tell the difference between real and fake happiness even if we're not trained. We can tell a sincere smile or not. This actually study started in the 1800s with a guy named Duchenne. Anyone ever hear of this study? Duchenne, the Duchenne smile. So this was this French guy. He had this great idea. I want to prove that I can make people smile, happy, real smile, even if they don't know how. So he drove around the cities of France and had them bring prisoners out, and then drilled holes in their faces and stuck electrodes and shocked the crap out of them, and proved that he can activate the ocularis nerves, making people really smile. So to reward this psychopath, we now have the phrase the Duchenne smile. And there's lots of pictures you can find if you type that into Google. You can see these poor people sitting in the chair going like that, but it actually activates their. Again, I'm off tangent here. Sorry. Okay, I know we're going to keep moving. Yes, sir, we're moving. Okay, anger, and this is surprise. We have to keep going, so I'm going to do that. This is surprise, and this is contempt. Okay. So if we know that sadness creates an empathetic link, and if we know how it affects us, okay, us individually, as let's say the social engineers, and if we can practice the mastering showing the slight aspects of sadness, then what's the result? This is the result. Okay, we have our emotional content, we have our target buffer, and as simply as we did in the beginning, we can overflow them. How do we do that? Well, how do we see it happening now? These commercials are great examples of how this happens. Now, maybe they don't affect you, but you know how much money these people make a year? And I'm not saying they're malicious. They are helping, right? What's her face? I hate this commercial. Freaking showing like these like beaten, disabled dogs and stuff, and like, you know, the music is sad, and she comes on the screen and she's like near tears with her big sadness face, and the dog's like limping out, help me, you know, and you're like, oh, here's my money, you know, and then they, you know, this is modern marketing. They're using these emotional contents to get our emotions triggered, so we take the action of donating money. Okay, this is just a marketing example. Let me give you an example of how we use. Can I have time? How many time? Okay, I got enough time to go overtime while telling you this story. So we had a goal. We had a goal that we had this company, and they wanted us to get a USB key inserted into a computer. It was their policy. It was their logic. They did not want USB keys, and we had tried everything. Dropping them in the parking lot, putting them in the lobby, putting them like right next to people's cars. And people, I don't know what was going on with them. They just weren't putting them in. It was like the most policy-following company I've ever worked with since then, ever, too. We were failing miserably. And we had labeled inside folders everything: employee bonuses, salaries for next year, wife picks, accounting data. I mean, we tried everything that we could possibly try that works on every normal human, and for some reason this company wasn't working. So I went to the company, and I pull up in my car, and I have like a suit and tie on, and I have a folder that says resumes, and I have a bunch of resumes in there. And I pull it out, and I dump my coffee all over the resumes. And then I walk into the front door with my dripping folder of resumes, and I'm doing the sadness. And the woman there, she says, "Oh, honey, what happened to you?" And I quickly walk up to her desk. I lean on her desk, and I see that she has a picture, two little girls with like a little ball and a little cat on her desk. So I'm like, okay, she likes cats, so it has a cat. So I said, I was driving down the road here coming for an interview. I was supposed to be in the interview in like 10 minutes, and a cat ran out in front of me. And, you know, I just love cats. I love cats. They're like my favorite animals on earth. And usually I'm like speeding up when I see a cat, but I love cats. And I didn't want to kill it, so I slammed on my brake, and my coffee fell out of my hand and went all over my car, and it soaked my last resumes. And I've been out of work for 4 months, and I really need this job. Please, I don't even know what to do. And she's like, oh, well, what can I do to help you? And I said, I have this USB key with my resumes on it. And I'm just wondering if you'd be able to print me out one copy for this interview, and then I'll go to a shop and I'll get others. And she said, sure, honey, give it to me. So on there I have two files. One said resume 2014, and one said resume 2013. That way, the 14 was the malicious one, 13 was backup. So she clicks to 14, Word crashes, I get a text message, shell, awesome, and then she says, I can't get it to open. And I'm like, oh, is there another one in there? I think I have an older version. That will work for this. So she prints it. Graham, I get a good copy of a resume. And then she's like, what time is your appointment? I look at my phone, and I say, oh, it's with Mrs. Smith at 11 o'clock. And she says, Mrs. Smith, 11 o'clock? What company are you interviewing with? And I said, oh, with ABC Company. And I was in my right target, but I was saying something different. And she says, oh, you're having a bad day, honey. Your ABC Company's next door. This is XYZ. And I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid. I'll go over there now. That was supposed to be my egress. Well, this is what happens when you do this too well. She takes me by the hand. I'm going to bring you to Mrs. Smith right now. And I'm going to tell them that you need this job, and you come with me. And she's taking my hand, and I'm going, oh, crap. Oh, crap. So we're walking over to XYZ, and I'm like, do I fall? Do I feign sickness? Do I punch her and run? What do I do? So I stop, and I'm like, oh, ma'am. I said, you know what? You have been great, but I'm like flustered. I almost killed this cat. I come in the wrong company. I'm soaked in coffee. Dave Kennedy keeps molesting me, and I say all these things to her. I'm like, I'm going to go to my car. I'm going to take 1 minute to just catch my breath, breathe, and then I'll go to the company. Is that okay? And she's like, that's probably a good idea. And why don't you do that? Good luck, Sonny. And she goes away, and I'm like, out of there. So the story though is that it wasn't just that I could show sadness, right? It wasn't that, but it was understanding how people process emotion. So the request came after she had been emotionally hijacked, and that is really important to understand. Is that the request from me came after that. And that made it easier for her to comply. If I had walked in there and just went, hey, I spilled some coffee on some resumes, and I need you to print me a couple for an interview I'm going into, what may have been her response? She may have been more like, well, who are you interviewing with? And I would have said, Mrs. Smith. And she, well, that's next door, so go over there and ask them. Right? It had to be a storyline that would have built the sadness. So we can have that hijack and then use that hijack to get her to do things. Using the proper level of emotion to trigger an emotional response can make the target buffer overflow their emotional system and their brain, causing them to take an action or a group of actions that they shouldn't take. Okay, that's the simplification of a human buffer overflow. Do I have time for Q&A? I have no time. So guys, if you have questions, I will go out into the hallway and you can come and talk to me. Thank you for coming and dealing with stuff.